Well, I guess for a vampire movie, this one didn't exactly have a lot of bite. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer release, Morbius. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you are planning on seeing it. And make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like superhero reviews on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time, and let's talk about Morbius. This stars Jared Leto as Dr. Michael Morbius, who tries to cure himself of a rare blood disease. However, he inadvertently infects himself with a form of vampirism instead. This is directed by Daniel Espinosa, and it's finally here. After what seems like an eternity, Morbius has finally seen the light of day after initially being scheduled for release all the way back in 2020, before getting hit with delay after delay after delay. So much that one of the last movies in theaters before the pandemic, Sonic the Hedgehog, managed to get a sequel made and released now only a week after the release of this, and that is wild. And this is a continuation of the Sony Spider-Man universe after the two Venom movies, a universe which, despite the title, has yet to actually show us Spider-Man in any of these movies, with the cinematic universe being primarily focused on solo villain / anti-hero properties, since that's about all they can really do at this point. And even with liking the first two Venom movies, that's something I'm not necessarily keen on, to be perfectly honest, as I'm sure is the case with a lot of fans of the MCU who would rather just see these characters there. It's kind of unfortunate that with the MCU expanding and all these different characters are crossing over, that we still have one of the most famous properties, if not the most famous, still off just doing its own thing with arguably no real flow, due to Sony holding the copyright to Spider-Man, something which I doubt they'll ever give up. Like, it's cool we do get a Spider-Man in the MCU, of course, but a lot of his villains are all getting fleshed out and developed in this separate continuity. And we all know the controversy surrounding this one, but if you don't know by now, the whole thing with Morbius, even before all the delays, was that a lot of interest was piqued, not primarily because of the story, but because of the curiosity behind which universe this takes place in. Now, I'm not sure that wasn't the case for everyone, but I know the sentiment rang true with quite a number of people, myself included. You had the inclusion of elements from Tobey Maguire's universe, Andrew Garfield's universe, as well as most notably Tom Holland's universe with the strange inclusion of Michael Keaton's Vulture, at least according to the trailer. And then it turned out, a week before the film's release, there were reports of all those elements getting removed, with the Spider-Man references being kept to a minimum, giving us essentially a case of false advertising. And that wound up being a bit of a turnoff for quite a number of people, myself included. Not that there weren't those who were legitimately excited for this movie, with or without the Spider-Man references, but with all this multiverse stuff ramping up in the MCU, and the return of all these previous takes on the Spider-Man characters, the big point of interest for a lot of people was just which universe does this take place in? And without that, honestly, it didn't look like there was much to be excited about, because it otherwise looked like a fairly generic, by-the-numbers comic book movie, and as it turns out, that's exactly what this was. Now, it's not the worst comic book movie out there. I think people declaring it that are blowing it a little out of proportion, but it's not all that good either. Now, a lot of people will cite Jared Leto as the absolute worst thing about this, and as someone who's not a Jared Leto fan by any means, both as an actor and as a person, I wouldn't say he's the worst thing about this. His performance is certainly watchable, and he's clearly into the role, and he's trying to make the most out of it. Now, I wouldn't say he's exactly the most charismatic here, like I don't think Morbius was such an intriguing or compelling protagonist, and we'll get to more into that in a moment. But Leto was fine here. He's certainly done much worse than this. Believe me when I say that. The only one who definitely outdoes him here is Matt Smith as Michael's adopted brother Milo, who winds up becoming the villain of the movie when he gets infected with the same form of vampirism as Michael and becomes evil just because. His reasoning behind why he turned so evil is another thing we'll get into, but I mean, Matt Smith really hams it up in this role, doing little victory dances when he gets the upper hand in a fight, and usually going for a theatrical approach when trying to give off this threatening aura, and I thought he really gave it his all, and he was easily one of the most entertaining parts of the film. I also thought the action was done well enough. The way that both Michael and Milo move around in their vampiric state was a very stylish touch, where we'll see them slow down for a moment before swiftly bouncing all around the room, attacking whoever it is, almost unable to be hit. These sequences would generally only last for a few seconds, unfortunately, but they added a brief glimmer of excitement, giving this film a much needed energy boost. Though those positives aside, I otherwise did not particularly enjoy this film at all. And what's frustrating is there was clearly potential for so much more in there, especially with the conflict stemming from this drama between these two adopted brothers, and with all the potential world building that could have come out of this, given its connections to Venom and whatever else Sony has planned for this world. But what ultimately frustrated me is just how by the numbers it felt. Like, this felt like something that would have been made in 2003 or 2004. Not that there weren't any good superhero movies made at that time, because there were a few, but this followed the same formulaic superhero origin story that we got with a lot of films from that time, though the problem is, it's also without much of the emotional substance. Like, the big thing for me, more than anything else, is that this felt chopped down. Like, there was clearly more written in here, and there was plenty more that was filmed, though with the constant delays that this received and the shifting around of things, especially in the wake of Spider-Man No Way Home having an effect on this, it felt like so much got left on the cutting room floor. Because not only is this just your basic superhero origin story, and one where the villain is essentially a carbon copy of the hero, which is something we even got a lot in the early days of the MCU, but whatever plot element or storyline it focused on, it felt like it moved off of it as quickly as it was brought up. The biggest example for me would be the relationship between Michael and Milo. Since they're really adopted brothers, we get this flashback showing their introduction, and we'll get like a scene or two of them as kids, and then we get like one scene or two of them in the present day as adults, showcasing their loving relationship. But then the very next time we see Milo, he becomes straight up evil and embraces being this killer vampire with no remorse, and no one can get in his way. It's such an abrupt shift for the character. Like, as good as Matt Smith was, he was essentially just trying to salvage a poorly written character. I enjoyed him, but it wasn't because he was all that compelling. Because, like, the jump from good to evil is so abrupt and with so little reason behind it. And because we barely explored the relationship between these two, it made it a little hard to find this conflict to be so high in stakes. Despite their prior relationship, all I saw was just a carbon copy of the hero who wanted to be evil because the script called for it. I didn't see a complex, nuanced villain, and because of how much they decided to play into these predictable beats that we've seen in so many other films before, it just made this feel dull. And even if you take that out of the equation, the way some scenes flowed did not feel cohesive all the time. It wasn't to the point of total confusion or anything, like once you pick up on things you can understand where it's going, but it'll jump through a number of time periods in like rapid fire succession, especially in the first act. And yet the way each scene felt, it was like a normal scene transition. Like the ones of Morbius as a kid to Morbius as an adult are kind of obvious time jumps, but there were times where he's an adult and it'll jump forward to an unknown period of time and you don't completely realize it right away because the way it plays out is just like any other standard scene transition. Likewise, there are storylines that get dropped halfway through, in particular one involving a patient whom Morbius has this connection with and whose fate is left in a very odd place. And then even the action scenes last for all of 5 seconds at times. Like, as cool as the fights would look, they're over in like an instant every time. It's like this very brief boost of energy that gets you excited for a moment and teases that you're about to get something big, and then it's over in a flash before the film goes back to being dull and unengaging. Even the final villain fight is paced the exact same way. The pivotal moment of the film where all this conflict comes to a head is over in what had to be less than 5 minutes. And it's a shame because at the very least it did look good, but you wind up barely feeling anything because not only does it feel like there's a total lack of character development, but because it's over in like the snap of your fingers. It's very disappointing. Now, I also don't do this very often with newer releases, but I do want to briefly talk about the post-credit scenes here, as those have also been a massive issue fans have had with this. I know these were discussed online already, especially as Daniel Espinosa himself spoiled the movie like a week ahead of time, but I know not everyone read up on that, so all I'll say is, if you haven't seen Morbius by now and you wish to know nothing, this is your spoiler warning. Skip to my closing thoughts and rating, go watch the movie, then come back to this. But here we go. So the thing we know Sony's been trying to do for years now has been setting up a Sinister Six movie. They were teasing this all the way back from the Andrew Garfield films, where the ending of each of those films saw a mysterious figure visiting each of the movie's villains and suggesting a team be put together. And obviously we never got that movie, as Sony scrapped any further Amazing Spider-Man installments and instead rebooted the character in the MCU. now they're at it again, and in what's arguably the dumbest way possible. And I try to refrain from hyperbole on here, especially when talking negatively about a film. But whereas everything else in this movie was watchable, but not as bad as everyone says it was, these post-credit scenes were truly god-awful. I'm sorry. If you like them, I'm glad to hear, but I thought they were really sloppily done. So, Michael Keane's Adrian Toomes, who was initially part of the marketing and implied to be somewhere in the middle of the film, gets moved to the post-credit scenes. In the first post-credit scene, we see him get transported out of the MCU and into the Sonyverse due to the spell Doctor Strange cast at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. He winds up in a jail cell, barely thinks anything of how he got there, and is immediately released from prison as they don't have a record of him there. And in the second post-credit scene, we see Morbius drive out to the middle of nowhere and meet up with Toomes, who now has his Vulture suit back, and he says he thinks Spider-Man is behind how he got here, and he suggests he and Morbius team up, which Morbius is interested in, and this implies the beginning of the Sinister Six. So, first of all, while you might be able to get away with yada-yadaing Toomes' transport into the Sonyverse because of it being magic and you don't know how it all works, that still isn't how the No Way Home spell goes. Everyone who wasn't from that universe got sent back to their own worlds, so why would Toomes, whose homeworld is the MCU, get transported out of there? Now, one can argue that once again Strange may have accidentally botched the spell slightly and that's what caused it, like there were some unintended side effects in the heat of the moment. I can kind of buy it, but it's still a stretch. But everything else is where you really start to lose me. For one thing, Toomes' whole motivation was that he isn't a bad guy. It's just that he was doing what he did for his family. And in both post-credit scenes, it's like he doesn't even think twice of his family. You don't hear them mentioned once. He acts just so nonchalantly about being literally transported to another world, with the possibility of never seeing them again. And now he's just this generic evil mastermind who wants revenge on Spider-Man, even though that goes completely against his characterization in Spider-Man Homecoming. He wasn't a revenge sort of guy unless you were after his family's livelihood. Also, not quite sure how he got his Vulture suit back, as not only did he not create that suit himself in Homecoming, but that suit was made out of the alien technology used in the Avengers, which didn't happen in this world. And the fact that he manages to cobble the suit together on his own as quickly as he does is also just another huge suspension of disbelief. Unless you want to tell me a long period of time passed between both post-credit scenes, but I doubt it. And then, why would Morbius have any interest in Spider-Man when, at least in this universe, he hasn't even heard of Spider-Man yet? Or, even if he did, he hasn't had any run-ins with him. Why would he care? He clearly says he's intrigued by what Toomes is proposing, but why? Also, which Spider-Man are they going to face? Is Toomes going to work on a way for them to all get back to the MCU and fight Tom Holland? Is Tom Holland coming to the Sonyverse? Are they going to fight a completely different Spider-Man? And if it's a different one, why would Toomes care about him when his issue is with the Spider-Man of his universe? And what's his ultimate motive? Like I said, he really wasn't a bad guy. He was just doing this for his family. So now he's just evil, or what? I mean, look, I get Sony's motivation for wanting to get the ball rolling on seeing the Sinister Six. They're one of the most well-known group of villains in comic book history who go up against one of the most iconic heroes in comic book history. But you still need to be able to build to these storylines with some sense of coherent storytelling. And it's clear from this that Sony might not exactly have a well-thought-out plan to get to where they want to be. If they're willing to contradict all the rules established by previous films, it makes it clear that they just want the Sinister Six movie and they don't really care how they get there. So if this is how they're handling the lead up to it, it's not making me very excited for the final product, and that's honestly a shame. Now, I don't think they'll ultimately care, as Morbius has done well enough at the box office, and despite everyone ragging on the movie, they'll still turn up for these future installments to see how everything plays out since, well, it's Spider-Man. And if people still keep turning up, then Sony really won't care how good or bad the reception ultimately is to these films. I just wish that we'd be able to build towards them, though, in a way that felt organic and earned, so that not only do we get the team-ups that we know we want to see, but they also become memorable stories while doing so that we can enjoy constantly coming back to them. Because I'll be honest, I've defended a lot of the most hated Spider-Man installments before this. As messy as Spider-Man 3 can be, or the Venom movies, or the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I always found there to be something to appreciate in each of those films, and I don't mind rewatching any of them. This, though, while there are elements here I found to be decent, this might be the first Spider-Man related film where I really have no desire to rewatch it unless I have to for the sake of a video. I honestly did not like it and don't know if I'd ever revisit it on my own. And that's something I never thought I'd say regarding a Spider-Man related film, so that's the ultimate disappointment. While maybe not as bad as everyone else says it was, Morbius is a mess, and easily the worst of the Spider-Man related films that I've seen. While Jared Leto is fine, and Matt Smith gives it his all, along with some action scenes that were shot well, it's ultimately a very by-the-numbers and dated superhero movie that feels hollow and somewhat disjointed due to its lack of cohesive scene transitions and the rushed aspect of the story. While I hope this is a simple blip for Spider-Man related films and we get back on track with whatever's next for the Sony Spider-Man universe, this really was a massive disappointment. Morbius gets a 4.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see Morbius, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like the story? Are you looking forward to seeing where the Sony Spider-Verse goes next? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.